I hadn't even taken off my apron when she said it. We were all sitting around the dinner table, the roast still steaming, the potatoes barely touched on everyone's plates. My daughter-in-law, Jessica, looked at me with that practiced smile of hers and said, "Let's be honest, Evelyn, you're just the babysitter now. That's what you've become, isn't it?" The silence that followed was deafening. My son Michael looked down at his plate. The children kept eating, oblivious to the poison that had just been served alongside the meal I'd spent 3 hours preparing. To continue listening to this beautiful and special story, please leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Write your name and the city you're watching from, so I can include a special greeting for you in an upcoming story. I stood up slowly, walked to the kitchen, and washed my hands with the same methodical precision I'd learned during my years of service. When I returned to the dining room, I looked directly at Jessica and said, "I need you to leave my house." It wasn't the first time she'd hurt me, but that night, something inside me finally broke. Not in a way that shattered me, but in a way that set me free. My name is Evelyn Carter, and for the past 5 years I've been called only when it was convenient. When I came back from the base, exhausted from my duties, I'd find my room occupied, my things moved around, my grandchildren already waiting with their overnight bags packed. "You have more time now, don't you? You don't work like you used to," Jessica would say, as if my 23 years of military service had been a hobby I'd outgrown. What no one saw were the years I'd put my life on hold. My uniform folded in the corner of my suitcase, just to be close to family. They said I was too strong, that nobody understood what I felt. Maybe that was true. I'd learned to swallow in silence, to hef without keeping score, to love without being remembered. But watching Jessica take up space as if it had always been hers, I realized that time doesn't heal everything. It just shows you who always believed they had the right to take what's yours. Chapter 2. The house that became theirs. It started slowly, the way most invasions do. 3 years ago, when Michael lost his job, I offered him a place to stay, "just until you get back on your feet," I said, opening my door without hesitation. Jessica walked through my home like she was inspecting a hotel room. She ran her finger along the mantelpiece, where my service medals were displayed, and said, "This feels so military. We'll need to make some changes to feel comfortable." I watched her redecorate my living room within the first week. My leather armchair, the one I'd saved for months to buy after my first deployment, was moved to the basement. "It doesn't match the aesthetic we're going for," she explained, arranging throw pillows on a new sofa she'd ordered without asking. My photographs from my years in service disappeared from the walls, replaced by family portraits where I was notably absent. When I asked about them, Jessica shrugged. "We thought it might be confusing for the kids to see you in uniform. They need to see you as grandma, not as a soldier." But I was never just a soldier. I was their grandmother who happened to serve her country. There's a difference, though Jessica never bothered to learn it. The final straw came when I found my Purple Heart medal in a box in the garage, wrapped in an old dish towel. When I confronted her about it, she looked genuinely confused. "Oh, that old thing? I thought it was just taking up space. You don't really display military stuff anymore, do you?" I held that medal in my hands, remembering the shrapnel that had torn through my shoulder in Afghanistan, the months of physical therapy, the pride in my commanding officer's eyes when he pinned it to my chest. Jessica saw an old thing taking up space. I saw the price of freedom, paid in blood and sacrifice. That night I quietly moved the medal back to its place of honor on my dresser, but I began to understand that respect, like territory, has to be defended. Chapter 3. The grandmother they needed me to be. Emily and Jake, my grandchildren, were 6 and 8 when their parents moved in. They were bright, curious children, who asked questions about everything except the one thing that mattered most to me. "Grandma, why do you wake up so early?" Emily would ask, finding me in the kitchen at near 500 hours, already dressed and making breakfast. "Old habits," I'd tell her, not explaining that discipline isn't something you turn off when you hang up your uniform. It's woven into your bones, part of who you are. Jessica made sure the children never heard stories about my service. When Jake found my old dog tags in a drawer and asked about them, Jessica quickly intervened. "Those are just old jewelry, sweetie. Nothing important. But children see more than adults give them credit for." Emily noticed how I stood straighter when the national anthem played during baseball games on TV. Jake watched me fold their clothes with the same precision I'd once used to fold my dress blue. Grandma was a soldier, Jake whispered to Emily one day, not knowing I could hear them from the kitchen. Don't be silly, Emily replied, echoing what she'd been taught. Grandma is just grandma, as if 23 years of service, of sacrifice, of sleepless nights worrying about the safety of my fellow soldiers and the freedom of my country, could be erased by domestic convenience. I never corrected them. Children should feel safe in their innocence. But every time they called me just grandma, a little piece of who I'd been disappeared. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd fought for the freedom of strangers in foreign countries, but I couldn't fight for the right to be myself in my own home. Chapter 4. The Subtle War. Jessica waged her campaign with surgical precision. She never yelled or created obvious drama. Instead, she used the quiet violence of 1,000 small cuts. She'd rearrange my kitchen while I was out, claiming she was organizing but really establishing dominance. My coffee mugs, arranged by size for efficiency, would be scattered randomly through the cabinets. My spice rack, alphabetized from years of military meal prep, would be reorganized by color. I'm just trying to make things more homey, she'd say when I'd quietly put everything back in its proper place. She'd invite friends over without telling me, then introduce me as Michael's mom who lives with us. Not as the homeowner, not as the woman who'd earned this house through decades of service and sacrifice, but as a dependent living on their charity. When I'd return from my monthly veterans meetings, she'd ask, "How was your little club?" with the same tone someone might use to ask about a hobby group for collecting stamps. My little club, men and women who'd served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, people who understood the weight of memory, the price of freedom, the brotherhood that forms when you've trusted someone with your life. To Jessica, we were just old people complaining about the past. The most devastating attack came during Michael's birthday dinner. I'd prepared his favorite meal, the same one I'd made for him every year since he was 8 years old. As we sat around the table, Jessica raised her glass and said, "Thank you, Evelyn, for all your help. We couldn't manage without our live-in babysitter." Everyone laughed, even Michael smiled, but I saw the calculation behind Jessica's eyes, the way she watched me carefully to see if her latest missile had hit its target. It had, but I didn't let her see the impact. Chapter 5. When I became invisible. The transition from family member to employee happened so gradually that I almost didn't notice it. Suddenly, I wasn't invited to family planning conversations. I'd learn about weekend trips when I found suitcases by the front door. "Oh, we thought you'd prefer to stay home," Jessica would say. "You're always talking about how much you value your quiet time." I'd never said that. What I'd said was that I enjoyed the peace of early morning coffee, the ritual of watching the sunrise. But Jessica had weaponized my words, turned my small pleasures into evidence that I preferred isolation. The children's schedules became my responsibility by default. Doctor's appointments, school pickups, homework supervision, bedtime routine. I didn't mind helping. I loved spending time with Emily and Jake, but somewhere along the way, helping became expected. "Can you pick up Jake from soccer practice?" became, "You're picking up Jake from soccer practice." No question, no please, no thank you, just the assumption that my time belonged to them. When I mentioned that I'd like to visit my old unit for their annual reunion, Jessica sighed dramatically. "But Emily has that school play that week. You know how much she needs you there." I'd attended every school play, every soccer game, every piano recital. I had a drawer full of programs and photographs, memories I treasured, but somehow, wanting to spend one evening with the people who'd shared the most dangerous years of my life was seen as abandonment. I canceled the reunion trip. Jessica's smile of satisfaction told me everything I needed to know about who was really in charge of my life. That night, I looked at myself in my bedroom mirror. When had I become this person? When had Sergeant Major Evelyn Carter, who'd commanded respect from soldiers twice her size, become this quiet shadow who apologized for existing in her own home? Chapter 6. The day everything became clear. It was a Tuesday morning when I finally saw the complete picture. I'd been up since 5, as always, preparing breakfast and packing lunches. Jessica came downstairs in her robe, yawning dramatically. "Morning, Evelyn," she said, pouring herself coffee from the pot I'd already made. "I need you to take the kids to school today. And pick them up. And don't forget Emily has dance class at 4. I have a doctor's appointment at 3. I said quietly. Jessica paused, coffee cup halfway to her lips. Can't you reschedule? It's not like it's urgent, right? You look fine to me. It was my 6-month cardiac follow-up. Routine but necessary after the stress-related issues I'd developed in Afghanistan. But Jessica didn't know that, because she'd never asked about my medical history, my service record, or anything else that made me more than a convenient caretaker. It's important, I said. She sighed. The way someone sighs when dealing with an unreasonable child. Fine, I'll figure something else out. But this is really inconvenient, Evelyn. We count on you. Count on me. Not appreciate me. Not value me. Not love me. Count on me, like I was a reliable appliance that occasionally malfunctioned. After everyone left for the day, I sat in my kitchen and made a list. On one side, I wrote down everything I'd given up since they'd moved in. My space, my routine, my independence, my identity, my connection to my past, my relationships with my fellow veterans. On the other side, I wrote down what I'd received in return. The answer was devastating in its simplicity. I'd received the privilege of serving people who saw me as invisible. That evening, when Jessica complained about the grocery bill and suggested I might be buying too many expensive things, I didn't argue. I just nodded and made a mental note to add that moment to my growing collection of small humiliations. Change was coming. I could feel it building inside me like a storm gathering strength. I just didn't know what form it would take. Chapter 7. The breaking point approaches. The dinner that changed everything started like so many others. I'd spent the afternoon preparing Michael's favorite roast, the same recipe my mother had taught me, the one I'd perfected during my brief breaks between deployments. Emily helped me set the table, carefully arranging the napkins the way I'd shown her. Jake came in from the backyard, grass stains on his knees, smiling the way children do when they've spent the day in their own world. Something smells amazing, Grandma, he said, wrapping his arms around my waist. For a moment, everything felt right. This was why I'd opened my home, why I'd sacrificed my independence. Family dinners, children's laughter, the simple pleasure of cooking for people you love. Michael arrived home tired, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. Mom, this smells incredible. You've outdone yourself again. I felt a warm flush of pride. Cooking had always been my way of showing love, the way I'd made sure Michael felt cared for during the brief times I was home between deployments. Jessica came downstairs last, as she always did, making her entrance when the work was done. She surveyed the table with the eye of a restaurant critic, noting the good china I'd used, the fresh flowers I'd cut from my garden, the care I'd put into every detail. This is nice, she said, but her tone suggested it was adequate rather than appreciated. We sat down together, and for the first few minutes, conversation flowed naturally. Michael talked about a project at work. The children shared stories from school. I listened with the contentment that comes from gathering the people you love around your table. Then Jessica's phone rang. She answered it without apology, launching into a detailed conversation about weekend plans with one of her friends. The rest of us continued eating, but the spell was broken. When she finally hung up, she looked around the table as if seeing us clearly for the first time. Her eyes settled on me, and I saw something calculating in her expression. You know what, Evelyn? She said, her voice carrying that false sweetness that always preceded her cruelest observations. Looking at all this, I just have to say it out loud. I felt my stomach tighten, the way it used to before walking into hostile territory. Chapter 8. The words that shattered everything. Let's be honest, Jessica continued, carving her roast with deliberate precision. You're just the babysitter now. That's what you've become, isn't it? The words hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. I felt the impact in my chest, a pain sharper than the shrapnel that had earned me my Purple Heart. Michael's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. The children kept eating, their innocence protecting them from understanding the depth of cruelty in their mother's words. Just the babysitter, not the woman who'd served her country for 23 years, not the mother who'd raised Michael to be a decent man, not the grandmother who'd rearranged her entire life to help them through their crisis. Just the hired help. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, to remind his wife that this was my home, my table, my family. But Michael's eyes stayed fixed on his plate, his shoulders curved in the posture of a man who'd learned to avoid conflict at any cost. Jessica continued, warming to her theme. I mean, that's essentially what this arrangement has become, right? You watch the kids, you cook the meals, you clean the house. If we were paying you, it would be the same relationship. If they were paying me, the casual cruelty of that observation hit me like a physical blow. In Jessica's mind, I wasn't family contributing to family. I was unpaid labor that she'd somehow managed to secure. I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate and controlled. 23 years of military discipline had taught me that the most powerful responses come from complete composure. "Excuse me," I said quietly, walking to the kitchen. I washed my hands methodically, the way I'd done 1,000 times before difficult missions. In the mirror above the sink, I saw a woman I barely recognized. Not the confident soldier who'd earned the respect of her peers, not the devoted mother who'd balanced service and family, but a stranger who'd allowed herself to become invisible in her own life. When I returned to the dining room, my voice was steady and fine. "Jessica, I need you to leave my house." The silence that followed was complete. Even the children stopped eating, sensing that something fundamental had shifted. "What?" Jessica laughed, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. "You heard me correct. Please gather your belongings and leave." Chapter 9. The Choice That Set Me Free. Michael found his voice first. "Mom, you can't be serious. Where are we supposed to go?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised with such hope, and felt the final thread of my old life snap. "That's not my problem to solve anymore." Jessica's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally, panic. "You can't just throw us out. We have nowhere to go. The children are settled here. The same children you just used to justify treating me like hired help," I said calmly. "The same children you've taught to see me as less than family." Emily looked confused, her young mind trying to process the sudden tension. Jake reached for my hand, his instincts telling him to choose safety, and I squeezed his fingers gently. "This is ridiculous," Jessica said, standing up so quickly her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "You're being dramatic." I was just being honest about the situation. Honest. As if honesty justified cruelty. As if speaking the truth gave her permission to strip away my dignity. "You're right," I said. "You were being honest. And so am I. This is my house. Earned with my service. Paid for with my sacrifice. You've made it clear that you see me as an employee rather than family. So our employment relationship is terminated." Michael stood up, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Mom, think about what you're doing. These are your grandchildren. My grandchildren will always be welcome in my home," I said, looking directly at Emily and Jake. "But their parents have made their position clear. I'm just the babysitter, and babysitters can be replaced." The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. Jessica had spent 3 years systematically diminishing my role in the family, reducing me to nothing more than domestic help. Now that same reduction was setting me free. I walked to the front door and opened it, the evening air cool against my face. "I'll give you 1 hour to pack your immediate necessities. The rest can be collected later this week." Jessica followed me, her composure finally cracking. "You can't do this. We have rights. We've been living here for 3 years. As my guests," I said. "Guests who have forgotten their manners." Michael appeared beside his wife, holding Jake in his arms while Emily clung to his leg. The sight of them together should have melted my resolve, but instead, it strengthened. These children deserved better than parents who taught them to disrespect the people who loved them most. "Please, Mom," Michael said, his voice breaking slightly. "Let's talk about this rationally." I looked at my son, seeing both the boy I'd raised and the man he'd become. "There's nothing rational about allowing yourself to be diminished in your own home. I taught you better than that." Chapter 10. The peace I'd been searching for. They left that night, Jessica muttering about lawyers and rights while Michael carried sleeping children to their car. I watched from my living room window as they drove away, their headlights disappearing around the corner like the end of a difficult chapter. The house felt different immediately. Not empty, but clean, like air after a storm when the pressure finally breaks and you can breathe again. I walked through my home, seeing it clearly for the first time in 3 years. My leather armchair, rescued from the basement, looked perfect in its original spot by the fireplace. My service medals, returned to their place of honor, caught the lamplight and gleamed like the proud memories they represented. That night, I called my old unit commander, the one whose reunion I'd missed. Sarah, I said when she answered. Is that invitation for the next gathering still open? Evelyn. Her voice carried the warmth of shared experience, the bond forged in service. Of course it is. We've missed you. We've missed you. 4 simple words that Jessica had never spoken, that Michael had forgotten how to say. The next morning, I woke at no 500 hours, as always. But instead of rushing to prepare breakfast for ungrateful mouths, I sat on my back porch, with my coffee and watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of possibility. Emily called later that week. Grandma, when can we come see you? Anytime you want, sweetheart, I said. But there are new rules now, rules about respect and gratitude, and remembering that people who love you aren't just there to serve you. Michael took the phone from his daughter. Mom, we need to talk. Yes. I agreed. We do when you're ready to have a conversation between equals. Instead of a lecture about obligation, call me back. I hung up gently, not in anger but in the quiet strength that comes from finally knowing your worth. 3 weeks later, Michael came to my door alone. His shoulders were straight, his eyes clear, and when he spoke, I heard the man I'd raised rather than the boy who'd forgotten his backbone. I'm sorry, he said simply. You deserved better from all of us. I invited him in for coffee, and we talked like adults, like family, like people who understood that love without respect is just another form of using someone. Jessica never apologized. I didn't expect her to. Some people see kindness as weakness and mistake patience for permission to take advantage. I'd learned to recognize the difference. 6 months later, I received a letter in the mail. Emily's handwriting, careful and precise. Dear Grandma, I understand now why you made us leave. Mommy was mean to you. And being family doesn't mean you get to be mean. Can we come for dinner next Sunday? I promised to help cook and say thank you. I called immediately. Yes, sweetheart, you can always come for dinner. But there's something I need you to understand. I'm not just your grandma. I'm Sergeant Major Carter, who served her country with honor, and I'm a person who deserves respect. Just like everyone else. I know, Grandma. Daddy told me about your medals. Will you tell me about them sometime? For the first time in years, I smiled with my whole heart. I would love to. That Sunday, Emily and Jake came for dinner. Michael drove them over and stayed, his wife notably absent. We cooked together, the children asking questions about my service, about the places I'd been, about the person I was beyond their perception of just Grandma. As we sat around the table, Emily raised her small glass of milk in a toast. Thank you, Sergeant Major Grandma, for this beautiful dinner and for teaching us about respect. I looked around my table, at the faces of the family members who'd chosen to see me as whole person rather than convenient help, and felt something I'd almost forgotten, peace. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to accept less than you deserve. Sometimes love means setting boundaries that protect not just your dignity, but the dignity of the people you're teaching to treat others with respect. I'd spent 3 years allowing myself to become invisible, believing that sacrifice meant erasing yourself for others. But real sacrifice isn't about disappearing. It's about choosing what matters most, and having the courage to fight for it. That night, after the dishes were done, and the children were safely home, I sat in my leather armchair, and opened a letter from my old commanding officer. Our unit was being honored at a veterans ceremony in Washington. Would I like to attend as their representative? I picked up my pen, and wrote back. Yes, it would be my honor. Honor, such a simple word, such a complex concept. I'd served my country with honor for 23 years. Now finally, I was learning to serve myself with the same dignity. The girl who'd once earned a Purple Heart for courage under fire had found a different kind of battlefield in her own home, and she'd won the most important victory of all, the right to be seen, respected, and valued for exactly who she was. Just the babysitter. No, Sergeant Major Evelyn Carter, mother, grandmother, woman of honor, and that was enough.